All right, I'm working on a project for a video that's going to be coming out very soon, but I ran into a little bit of a snag. I realized that I need to upgrade my infrastructure here in the shop. This project has 60 panels that I need to put a finish on, and my current drying rack is just too clumsy and not big enough to hold enough of these pieces. So I'm going to build a new drying rack today. All right, so I'm going to build this project out of poplar. I really only need 4/4 thick material, but I have this 8/4 piece left over from a previous project. So I'm going to resaw it down to 3/4 and get it milled up. All right, I got my parts cut to length and width, and because I can never leave well enough alone, I don't want to leave it with square corners. I want to round it over and make it look nice, you know, just because that's what I do. So I need to make some jigs. All right, so I cut a piece of plywood the same width as my part, my main leg here, and the swing arms are going to be about 2 inches. So I think I want to match, whoops. So I think I want to match that width. On the other side, I have a middle support that I also want to have rounded over. That's probably not making any sense to you right now because you haven't seen what it looks like in my head, but it's times like these I wish I had 2 bandsaws. This blade is kind of wide to cut sharp curves, and I'm feeling kind of lazy, so I'm not sure if I want to change it out. All right, let's do some layout here. Got our jig. So this top will just be decoration, rounding it over. And then I have a slot that's going to be our moving mechanism, and it needs to be 1.5 inches in. And then this guy, 37.5. So this will be our midpoint here for the mechanism. All right, so this will get cut out right here. And that'll be for the middle bracket. And we'll go down here to the other end. All right, and then on the bottom here, another decorative curve and a slot for the bottom bracket. All right, made sure my ends are flush, and I'm going to clamp these two together and then transfer my marks to here because these two are identical pieces. All right, so I need to cut a groove for our adjustable mechanism to slide in. So I'm going to do that with a router. So I have my sacrificial foam board down here so I don't cut into my workbench. All right, I got my router mounted onto my sled here with these adjustable runners that'll fit over the workpiece and lock me into place. I have a start and stop point marked out, and we're just ready to go. I'm going to take it in a couple passes just to make sure I don't bog down the router and create a bunch of tear out. All right, the jigsaw is a savage tool, and I used it only for the most barbaric tasks. Today I think it is an appropriate use because I just want to hog out this big chunk to get it close to the line, so that way when I pattern route it with my template here and a pattern routing bit, it doesn't catch the end grain and blow out and be all nasty. All right, I got a ginormous pattern bit in here, probably a little overkill. All right, so I got the first one done, and so instead of moving my jig around to each different location, I just clamp the finished one onto the one that I still need to route, so that way I can just do it all in one pass. All right, so for the cross brace moving mechanism, I want to make sure that they are exactly the same length and the holes are drilled in exactly the same spot, because that will help ensure that it won't bind up and it will move freely like I want it to. So I've squared off one end of my cross braces, and now I'm setting up a stop at the miter saw to make sure that everything comes out perfectly. All right, so this is where I'm going to drill the hole for it to pivot on, but I want to round these guys over. So that way these square corners don't get in the way of it as it pivots around. Do that on both ends here. And I'm going to just make one, and then I will clamp the rest of them together as I drill it, so that way the hole will be in the exact same spot on each one. And I only have to do the layout once. Also reduces the chance of error. All right, so I got my hole drilled there. I'm just going to line these guys up here. Make sure they're flush on the ends. All right, and then we'll just drill that hole out. All right, so before I round this over, I want to take a couple of shoulder cuts, because I'm going to then stand this up to make a little tenon on the end of this. And that little tenon is going to sit between two knuckles, and that's what it's going to rotate around. So I think it's going to be safer to cut this cut first and then round it over, opposed to cutting it afterwards. All right, so for the first one, I just sanded to my layout line, and then I'm just going to transfer that curve to the next one, and then I'll just sand to this line. I'm going to do it on both sides because it's easier just to sand on the one direction. If you catch that end grain while sanding, it could rip the part out of your hands. All right, so these are going to be the knuckles that the swing arm is going to swing inside of. So I have a data blade set up here with a jig to stand them up in, and I'm going to clamp it in here, and I'm going to cut one side, flip it over, and then cut it again. That way it will guarantee that this board is going to be centered. All right, I probably should be taking this cut in multiple passes because this is a really big cut, but I'm just going to go really, really slow and do it one pass and then flip it around and do it again. And that will guarantee that my slot is centered on the workpiece. Right, so I readjusted my fence so I can cut the shoulders on the swing arms. All right, so I need to drill a hole in here for this to pivot around, I need to round this over. So let's do some layout. All right, I'm going to round this guy over just like I did with this other piece here on the belt sander. But I screwed up when I cut this slit first. I should have drilled the hole first. So now when I drill through, this material is not supported and could cause a lot of blowout and make it so this doesn't turn in there very easily. So to solve that, when I drill the hole, I'm just going to slide a piece of scrap material in there to help give it some support. All right, and to connect the slot to this, because this piece is a little bit wider for some additional support, I'm just going to kind of draw in a decorative curve in here. And then when I sand, I'll just sand this away. All right, so before I sand down to the line to create the curves, I'm going to drill all the holes so that way I can just use this piece to line up for the next piece so I have some square edges to reference off of. All right, so I need to get a bolt that's an appropriate length, but proof of concept works pretty well. Plenty of clearance between the parts. Orbit's pretty nice, and it's pretty strong. I was a little worried about this being only a 1/4 inch thick, but that's plenty strong for our purposes on this build. So yeah, I think we're ready to start getting some assembly going. All right, so this kind of goes together like a sandwich. So this is our back plate, and then our center plate with our sliding notches in here. And then our knuckle goes in here between these guys, and then we have one side, a board up here like this, and a board down here like this. And this other knuckle will go on this back side down on the end down there. So I need to do 2 of them, and I want them to be exactly the same so that way these guys are on the exact same spot so they pivot smoothly without binding. So I'm going to use these guys as spacers to line up where this guy is at. And so to make sure that these guys come out exactly the same, I'm going to set up a stop at the miter saw when I cut these. So that'll guarantee that the stop is making them the same. All right, so it's time to assemble this thing. And now when I assemble this, I have all my parts laid out ready to go, and I have them in the proper orientation. So these guys, both sides are facing that direction. They are not mirror images of each other. How I have it worked out is these guys are offset, so when you flip it around to engage it when it's finished, that this will be in the right orientation. So they're not mirror images, so I'm going to make 2 exactly the same. All right, so this guy gets installed flush to the back and flush to the top. All right, now if this was furniture, I would clamp this, but since this is just a shop fixture, I'm going to speed things up and use my brad nailer so I can get back to work. So I'm lining up the top that is probably off camera that you can't see right now. And I'm going to line up the bottom. All right, and this center is going to be where I drill all the holes to add the supports to hold the pieces I'm finishing. So I am going to make sure I stay on the outside edges and not in the center because I don't want to drill through a brad. All right, so now I have this piece of scrap that I saved cut off from earlier. I'm just going to line it up here. And mark and cut it to fit. All right, so I got that guy on there and my support piece on this side. I'm just going to flip it over. All right, I'm going to use 1/2-inch conduit as my supports to lay my material across while it dries. But to build my jig, I'm going to sacrifice 1 inch off of one of the supports. And this will be my stop on my jig here. I'll show you how that works in just a second. All right, so we're going to make a little jig here to drill all the holes at an evenly spaced to slide our support rods through. So I got this guy here. It's about 7 inches by 27 inches. It's just some scrap. I ripped this guy down at 1.5 inches. I'm just going to flush it to the back and the ends. All right, so this guy is 3.5 inches, so half of that is 1.75 inches. So now I'm going to measure 1.75 inches from the fence up. All right, so that'll be my first hole, and then my second hole will be right here. I'm just going to measure down 4.75 inches. All right, so this is 1/2-inch conduit, but the inside diameter is 1/2 inch. The outside is closer to 11/16, so I have 11/16 inch bit in my drill press. So we're going to drill a starter hole here. All right, so this is going to be a really snug friction fit. All right, so since I want my conduit to be able to slide in and out, to be adjustable in the jig based on the thickness or width of panel I want to dry, I'm going to change out my 11/16 inch bit for a 3/4 inch bit. I have my jig here with my pipe on one side, and I'm going to line up to my other mark that I made earlier, my 3/4 inch bit. Then clamp it down to the table. So basically we're going to use this pipe as a reference. Once we get the first hole will drop over that to help locate the second hole, and then the second hole will drop over that to locate the third hole, and so on and so forth all the way down the line. All right, so now I need to lay out for my first hole. All right, so make sure I'm tight to the fence. All right, so now that I have the first hole laid out, all I have to do is pick it up, slide it over, and drop it down over my pipe, and that'll lock it in. So now I just do that all the way down, drill the hole, pick it up, slide it over, snap it down to the pipe, and I don't have to measure, lay out all of these, and each one will turn out exactly the same space across. So one of my first jobs in the trade was working for a bridge construction company in their fabrication shop. We built a lot of earthquake restraints and brackets and things to go up underneath the bridges. And this is just one of the things that I learned there that has stuck with me, and I've been able to use it from metalworking into my woodworking. So it's just a really quick, handy way to quickly drill holes in a long line without having to lay them all out if they're all evenly spaced. Big time saver. All right, so these are my feet. It's gonna have a caster in here on both sides to roll around, and it is going to be attached to the main beam with a half lap. So first I'm gonna find center. Then I'm gonna find the center of this guy. All right, and then I'm gonna loosely center it on this side. This bottom edge is what I flushed everything up with when I nailed these guys on, but the top edge is not as perfectly as flush as the bottom edge. So I'm gonna reference off the bottom edge each time. And so to find center, it's basically, I need this to be about 1 inch up. So I made these 2 blocks out of 1/2 inch plywood just to hold this up on center. All right, and then I'm gonna mark this with a marking knife. All right, and I've set my square to do the half lap, so it's 2 inches in. All right, so I got that marked in, and then I just gently marked it in, so I'm gonna come back here with my square and set that line a little darker so I can see it better. All right, so I got my layout lines here marked out, and since this thing is like 7 feet long or whatever, it's gonna be a little bit hard to maneuver this over the table saw, so I am just going to cut it out by hand. All right, so the last thing I need to do before I glue this up is drill for the casters, because I want this thing to be able to roll around. So instead of wasting money on buying threaded inserts to put in here and the time to put it all in and all that, I'm just going to tap the threads here, tap the wood. Last time I showed this on a video, people lost their mind like they didn't think it was possible or a good idea. But you know what? It has worked out really well every single time for me. So I think it is a valid way to do this. All right, one important thing I forgot to do is drill the center pivot hole in my arms here. So basically I'm dropping a bolt down on either end to help line this up, because this is a fairly critical measurement, because this is where it's going to pivot on. So if it's off a little, it's going to bind up. So I got these guys locked in. I've got my center point measured. And I'm going to clamp these two together and drill them out and then do the other pair. All right, one last thing I need to do is cut all these pieces of pipe to length, and these pieces of pipe are going to go through those holes for my panels to dry. So as I spray my finish, I can just load up the rack. All right, so to get the burr off from cutting it, I'm going to wire brush it, and I'm just going to wire brush any kind of imperfections on it, and then I'll wipe it down with acetone to get any undesirables off. So I have a nice, clean, smooth surface to set my workpieces down on. And yes, I lost the dealy mabob that goes here, so I just jigged up a little scrap of wood. Should work pretty good, I hope. Get your mind out of the gutter, boys. That's right. It's a family channel. All right, so now I know someone in the comments is going to say, hey, you're going to put an eye out with one of those guys. And I mean, that's what they make eye patches for. Both sides, you can put stuff on both sides. You can slide this guy out if you have a wide panel you need to support. Short panel, double-sided. Lots of capacity, I like it. I've been wanting one of these for a long time. Top one's a little bit of a stretch. Okay, so I've opened and closed this thing a dozen times or so, and it's working okay, but I'm not really okay with just okay. I want it to be as good as I can get it with what I have. So there's a couple of flaws in my design that did not show up when I 3D printed it. When I 3D printed it, it opened up really smooth, everything stayed rocking. But now that we're on a large scale, when I go to open and close it, there is more resistance on the ground because, you know, wheels on the ground versus just this part moving in the air. So this top part starts to close before the bottom part, and these two cross braces get out of sync, and it kind of binds up sometimes. Not every time, but just enough to be annoying. So to prevent that, I'm going to put this cross brace in here to link these two components together, so that way as one starts to close, it'll force the other one to start to close too. So it'll take out that slop, I hope. So I've drilled a hole in the top here, and I'm going to install the top one, and then I'm going to measure very carefully to make sure this is parallel with these sides, and these two sides are parallel with each other, so that way it's not starting out racked. And then I'll drill a hole in the bottom and link the two together. All right, so now that these two cross braces are linked together, nice and smooth operation now. So then the other thing I want to change is really more of a concern about design. Even when I was designing this in SketchUp, I had a concern that this little portion right here is going to be weak and could potentially break. And watching it bind up a little bit, I'm even more concerned now. So it hasn't broke yet, but I'm going to drill a hole through here, all the way through here, so that way I can cross pin it with the dowel. That way there is some glue strength with that dowel going across this grain. So hopefully that will prevent it from breaking if it ever gets stressed enough to break it, because that little 1.25 inches or whatever there is not a lot of meat going across this grain. So that's just a weak spot. All right, thanks for watching. I'll have plans available for this build on my website.